Come closer. The shadows have missed you, and tonight they have a new story to tell. Welcome to Scary Stories After Dark. The bus smelled faintly of diesel, damp coats, and the cheap citrus cleaner the school janitor always used before field trips. Outside, the sky sagged low and heavy, the kind of pale gray that promised a long, cold rain. 4 seats from the back, Harper, Jace, Rowan, and Lila had claimed their usual corner, legs stretched into the aisle, backpacks stuffed under their knees. Harper's boots tapped against the metal floor in a restless rhythm. Jace had his hood up, eyes on the streaks of condensation running down the window. Rowan was half asleep against Lila's shoulder, earbuds in but no music playing. The ride was supposed to take 3 hours. Greywater Cove, an out-of-the-way fishing town no one in the senior class had ever heard of, wasn't exactly a thrilling destination for the last weekend before graduation, but Principal Marlowe had insisted it was educational. The engine growled up a hill and the coastline slid into view, a jagged strip of black rock and pale sand, the ocean beyond it shifting like a sheet of tarnished metal. Halfway up the bus, someone cracked a joke about the place looking like the set of a low-budget horror movie. A few laughed, others just stared out at the mist crawling over the water. The driver took a turn too sharply, sending a ripple of movement through the seats. Harper steadied herself, then noticed the principal in the very front row. He sat perfectly still, hands clasped around a leather-bound book on his lap, eyes fixed straight ahead like he was counting the miles. They passed the last gas station an hour ago. Now there was nothing but empty road and crooked telephone poles leaning toward the sea. The bus's heater rattled. Somewhere behind them, a student whispered, "We shouldn't be going here." Harper turned toward the sound, but the words were swallowed by the steady thrum of the tires and the ocean's low roar. The road narrowed as the cliffs closed in, the ocean a restless shadow on the right, jagged black rock rising steep on the left. The mist thickened until it smeared the edges of the world, making the bus headlights into dull yellow orbs that barely cut the gray. Every so often, a lonely shack or a rusted fishing boat appeared in the fog, and just as quickly slipped away behind them. Harper noticed Jace staring at something out the window. "What?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "Thought I saw someone standing on the rocks." Rowan snorted from Lila's shoulder. "Probably just a buoy or..." The bus lurched as the driver swerved to avoid a shape in the road, something long, tangled in seaweed. It was gone before anyone could get a clear look. The laughter from earlier died off. The mist parted just enough to reveal the first sign, "Welcome to Greywater Cove, established 1874. The paint was peeling, the wood warped by decades of salt wind. Beyond it, the town seemed to grow out of the shoreline itself. Weathered clapboard houses with roofs like hunched shoulders, a narrow harbor where a few fishing boats rocked against their moorings, and a church steeple stabbing up through the fog like a black tooth. As the bus rumbled down the main street, the students fell silent. The locals turned to watch them pass, faces pale, eyes following without blinking. One woman stopped sweeping her porch, her broom frozen mid-air. A man on the dock let a dripping net slip from his hands into the water, never looking away. The bus pulled to a stop in front of the Greywater Inn, a tall, gaunt building whose windows reflected nothing at all. The principal rose, tucking the leather-bound book under his arm, and turned to face them with a thin smile. "Welcome to Greywater Cove," he said. "Stay together. Don't wander." Outside, the mist closed in, swallowing the ocean. The lobby smelled faintly of salt and damp wood. as if the sea had crept inside long ago and never left. Faded floral wallpaper curled at the seams, and an old brass bell sat on the counter, tarnished green around the edges. A woman emerged from the back room at the sound of the door. She was tall, with thinning black hair pinned back in a severe knot and eyes the color of storm water. Her smile didn't reach them. "You must be the school group," she said. Her voice was low, each word dragged like it had to be pulled up from somewhere deep. "We've prepared the top 2 floors." As the principal signed the registry, Harper noticed the guest book's pages were warped and stained, the ink blurred as though it had been wet once, or often. The woman slid the key rings forward. The brass tags were engraved with numbers that felt heavy in her palm. They were assigned in pairs, and the 4 friends ended up in 2 adjoining rooms at the end of the hall. The carpet was thin, worn smooth by decades of footsteps, and every floorboard creaked like it might remember who had stepped there last. In Harper and Lila's room, the window looked out over the harbor. Fishing boats swayed in the tide, and beyond them the ocean dissolved into mist. Harper thought she saw something rise just under the surface, a pale shimmer. But it was gone before she could focus. Across the hall, Jace flicked on the light in his and Rowan's room, revealing a damp ring on the nightstand as if someone had set down a dripping glass. But the air didn't smell like water. It smelled faintly of seaweed. Dinner was served in a small dining room lit by a single chandelier whose bulbs flickered in the draft. The locals filled the other tables, speaking in low tones. Every so often, Harper caught someone glancing their way, not curious, but measuring. Halfway through the meal, the principal stood. "Remember," he said, "this is a historical town. Respect the people here and the water." Jace leaned toward Harper and muttered, "Respect the water? What the hell does that mean?" No one answered. That night, as the inn went still and the ocean's hum filled the air, a faint wet slap echoed up from the harbor. Harper lay awake, listening. Somewhere down the hall, a door clicked open. Footsteps padded softly toward the stairs. One of their classmates was leaving. By morning, the mist had thinned just enough to see the harbor from the inn's windows, a narrow slip of dark water ringed by leaning docks. The tide was low, the air raw and briny. Breakfast was quiet. Half the students lingered over watery eggs and burnt toast, the others staring out the window like they were still half asleep. The teachers moved between tables, murmuring to each other. It took Harper a moment to notice who was missing. "Where's Leah?" she asked, scanning the room. Lila frowned. "Didn't she room with Cassidy? She was at dinner last night." Rowan shook his head. "I saw her leave, late. Thought she was going to the bathroom, but..." He trailed off, chewing the inside of his cheek. At the far end of the room, Kellen Price was hunched over a mug of coffee, his dark hair shadowing his face. He didn't look up when Harper's gaze caught him. "Bet it was him," muttered one of the basketball players at the next table, not bothering to lower his voice. Before Harper could say anything, the principal entered. "Leah isn't feeling well this morning. She's resting," he said too quickly. "We'll carry on with our schedule." The group filed out toward the day's activity, a guided walk along the coastline. The path wound between slick boulders and tufts of sharp grass, the ocean heaving below. Harper fell back a few steps and glanced over her shoulder. Kellen wasn't with the main group. He was 30 feet behind, hands in his hoodie pocket, eyes on the rocks like he was searching for something. Halfway along the trail, the guide stopped to point out the remains of an old shipwreck in the cove. Harper barely listened. Her eyes caught movement farther down the shore. A dark figure crouched near the waterline, then straightened, something glinting in their hand. It was Kellen. The tide surged unexpectedly, soaking him to the knees. He didn't flinch, didn't look toward the group, just pocketed whatever he'd picked up and walked inland. By the time they returned to the inn, Leah's bed was empty. The sheets were rumpled, the window cracked open to the smell of seaweed and rot. On the nightstand sat a small puddle of water, in the center of which lay a single spiraled seashell, slick and black like it had been pulled from the deep. By the second night, Greywater Cove felt smaller. The streets seemed to fold in on themselves, the same warped houses appearing no matter which direction you turned. The ocean was louder now, its low rolling pulse seeping into every quiet moment. Dinner was subdued. 2 more students were missing, Ben and Carly, and the teachers offered the same line, resting in their rooms. No one believed it, but no one said anything. Harper's gaze kept drifting to Kellen. He sat alone near the corner, poking at his food like he was only there out of obligation. His hoodie was damp again, the cuffs darkened, and his boots left faint prints on the warped floorboards. After the meal, Harper, Lila, Rowan, and Jace lingered in the hallway. "He's hiding something," Rowan said under his breath. "I saw him near the docks this afternoon. He was, I don't know, waiting for something." Lila crossed her arms. Or someone. They didn't have to wait long for another reason to suspect him. Later that evening, the friends crept down the hallway toward the stairwell, intending to slip outside before curfew. The air smelled faintly of salt water, the kind of damp that clings to everything. As Harper reached the top of the stairs, voices drifted up from the lobby. "Just don't get caught with it," a boy's voice said. Footsteps, then the muted squeal of the front door hinges. By the time they peered over the railing, the lobby was empty, except for a trail of wet footprints leading outside. They followed. The prints glistened in the moonlight, cutting through the fog toward the docks. The tide was in, slapping against the wooden pilings. A shape moved near the end of the pier. Kellen hunched over, fiddling with something in his hands. Harper caught a glint of metal before he shoved it into his pocket. "Kellen," Jace's voice cracked through the night. He froze, then turned slowly. Even in the dim light, they saw the shadows beneath his eyes, the way his expression didn't quite match his words. "You shouldn't be out here." "What's in your pocket?" Rowan asked, stepping forward. Kellen's jaw flexed. "None of your business." Before they could push further, a sound rose from the water, not the crash of waves, but a heavy gurgle, like something exhaling beneath the surface. The boards trembled under their feet. Kellen's eyes flicked to the dark water, then back at them. "Go," he said, his voice lower now, urgent. "You don't want to be here." The fog was so thick it felt solid, wrapping around their faces and dampening every sound except the ocean's churn below. Harper, Jace, Rowan, and Lila stood frozen halfway down the pier, eyes fixed on Kellen. He still hadn't moved, hands buried in his hoodie pocket. The wood beneath them creaked, shifting with the tide. "We're not going anywhere," Harper said. "Not until you tell us." A sharp splash cut her off. They all turned toward the end of the pier. The water there was darker, shifting in slow circles, the surface puckering as if something massive moved just beneath it. Rowan stepped closer, squinting. "Is that—" The water erupted. A pale arm, bloated, slick, mottled with barnacles, shot up, hooking its webbed fingers into the wood. Another followed. The nails cracked and black. The thing began to rise, dragging itself into the light. It was human-shaped once, Now its skin sagged like it had been soaked for centuries, strands of kelp clinging to its neck, mouth open in a silent, gurgling snarl. Its eyes were the clouded gray of things long drowned. Lila screamed. The creature lunged, seizing one of the basketball players who had wandered onto the pier behind them. Its grip was inhuman, jerking him toward the edge before anyone could react. Kellen moved first. He ripped something from his pocket, a flare gun, and fired. The sudden bloom of red light illuminated the thing's water-slick form, the seawater dripping from its jaw, before it released the boy and slid back into the black. The flare hissed as it hit the tide, dying out almost instantly. Silence closed in again, thick as the fog. Kellen's chest heaved. "Now do you get it?" he said, voice low. "It's not me you need to be afraid of." The group stumbled back to the inn in a tight knot, the fog curling around them like it wanted to follow inside. No one spoke. Their breaths came in short bursts, eyes darting to every sound. By the time they reached the lobby, the teachers were nowhere to be seen. The place felt emptier than before, too empty. The only sound was the slow tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. Jace pulled Harper aside. "We need answers, now." The four friends crept upstairs, keeping close to the wallboards. The principal's door was at the far end, closed and locked, but Rowan had learned long ago how to work an old latch. A quick twist, a careful push, and they slipped inside. The room smelled faintly of salt and old paper. On the desk sat a leather-bound book, worn smooth at the edges, a ribbon marking the middle. Harper lifted it carefully. The cover was stamped with an emblem, a ship's wheel encircled by a ring of jagged waves. She opened to the marked page. The ink was faded, but the words were still clear enough to read. October 3rd, 1874. The storm took the fleet, all but the captain's crew. They returned wet, pale, and strange, speaking of a bargain, an offering each year, or the sea would take us all. We did not believe until the first bodies washed ashore. Further down, in sharper handwriting, "My great-grandfather died on these shores, not as a loyal servant, but as an unwilling sacrifice. We fled, but the curse remains. One day, I will return and end it." Harper's heart thudded. This is him. This is his family. Lila's voice was barely a whisper. "He brought us here on purpose." The door clicked. They spun to see Principal Marlowe standing in the doorway, raincoat dripping on the floor. His eyes flicked from the journal to their faces. "You shouldn't be in here," he said, voice steady. "But now that you are, you need to understand. Tonight, we end this, all of us." Behind him, through the hallway window, the fog was rolling in fast. Thick, low, and humming with a sound that didn't belong to the wind. The wind had shifted. It no longer came from the sea, but from somewhere deeper, like the breath of something ancient stirring beneath the water. By nightfall, Greywater Cove was gone, swallowed by a wall of fog so thick the street lamps were nothing but faint halos. The harbor's silhouette blurred into shadow. The principal led them down the crooked streets, his raincoat whipping in the wind. "The pier is the only place they'll come fully out of the water," he said. "We end it there." But the friends weren't alone. Figures stepped from doorways, from alleys, locals with blank, salt-glazed eyes, moving in eerie unison. The cult. One by one, more joined, and Harper realized some wore the same clothes as their missing classmates. Their smiles were too wide, too still. Lila gripped Harper's arm. "They're different." "They're not them anymore," Rowan said quietly. The cult moved closer, guiding them toward the pier with an almost ceremonial calm. No one ran, no one shouted. The only sound was the tide, crashing harder now, each wave booming like a drumbeat. When they reached the end of the pier, the principal turned, holding something wrapped in oilcloth. He unrolled it to reveal a long, rusted harpoon. "Stay behind me," he ordered. The water beneath them shifted. Dark shapes circled below, just beyond the reach of the lamplight. Then, a hand broke the surface. Another. The drowned ones came. The first drowned one pulled itself up onto the pier with a wet thud. Barnacles cracked against the wood under its weight, its head tilted toward them, jaw slack, cloudy eyes unblinking. Water poured from its mouth in a slow, steady stream. Another rose beside it, and another. The cult began to hum, low, resonant, almost matching the pitch of the tide. The sound vibrated through the boards beneath their feet. The principal stepped forward, harpoon in hand. "Now," he barked. The friends scattered as the first drowned one lunged. Harper felt the board shudder under its impact, the air filling with the stench of rot and brine. Jace swung a loose length of wood, splintering it against the creature's ribs. It barely reacted. Kellen fired the flare gun again, bathing the pier in red light. The shadows twisted, revealing pale, bloated forms clinging to the pilings all around them. A wave crashed over the pier, drenching them to the bone. One of the cultists seized Rowan, dragging him toward the edge. Harper lunged, gripping his jacket and yanking him back, just as a webbed hand clawed up from the water where he'd been standing. The principal drove the harpoon through a drowned one's chest. It screamed, not in pain, but in a bubbling underwater roar, before collapsing into the tide. The water surged violently, as if the others felt it. "They'll pull the pier down," Leela shouted. The boards groaned and split. One section tilted sharply, sending two cultists tumbling into the black below. Pale shapes converged instantly, dragging them under in a froth of white and red. Harper grabbed the oil lantern from the dock post and smashed it onto the boards. Flames erupted, licking along the soaked wood as the kerosene spread. The heat and smoke mixed with the fog until the world became a boiling blur of orange and gray. The principal shoved them toward the shore. "Go! Don't stop!" They ran, boots pounding, lungs burning, the pier collapsing behind them in bursts of fire and splintering wood. The roar of the drowned ones followed until they reached the cobblestones of the main street. They didn't stop until they were on the bus. The driver slammed the doors shut, engine rumbling to life. As they pulled away, the fog swallowed Greywater Cove behind them, leaving only the sound of the tide fading into the distance. The survivors sat in silence, clothes dripping onto the vinyl seats. Harper stared out the window at the dark road winding back toward home. In the rear window, faint in the glow of the taillights, a single barnacle-crusted handprint smeared against the glass and slowly began to dry.